It's one of those items that sometimes the hard part is just figuring out which unit to mention it. All right, a couple of summaries. This is fourth hour. Test will be on Wednesday. Does that sound about right with everyone? That's our extended classes. We will have a block scheduled day, and you will do both multiple choice and essay at one time. All right, so that's out of the way. Next, I lied a little bit. We have one little term and one other thing. The election of 1800 will be on both tests. The election of 1800 is the end of Adams, but it is also the beginning of Thomas Jefferson. So really, that is the item that you should expect. You will probably see something on the federalism test, but it will definitely carry into the Jefferson test, which is what we'll be starting today. In a minute, we'll be focusing more on Jeffersonian democracy. The last item of the election of 1800 is the 12th Amendment. And does anyone have a question you want to, there we go.
Where's the 11?
Be the intelligent question is we went 1 to 10 in the Bill of Rights, correct? And then I just went to 12. The 11th Amendment is an amendment about states' abilities to sue other states. It's more of a technicality and a clarification. There was a situation in the Constitution where there was questions raised if states could really sue other states. The 11th Amendment basically sort of solves or deals with that, and it basically says no. You don't see it very often. It's much more of a vacation issue, and it just establishes the way it works. Ladies and gentlemen, the 12th Amendment is 1,000% a reaction to the election of 1800. In the election of 18, yes, sir?
What would be the case where you would actually sue?
Well, that was more of the situation, is where, could people, or could a state sue another state saying that what they're doing was a violation of their practices and things like that? And it would basically, it's the argument of what kind of responsibility states have. And it's also an issue of could the states sue the federal government. Where we go to is, I'm sorry, what was the main issue in the election of 1800? Tie. And folks, do you know what the biggest mistake people will make? Is they'll get it confused with 1796. In 1796, who became president?
John Adams.
Adams. And what was the controversy in that election? See, notice everybody slows down?
He wasn't.
It was the split parties. And folks, the biggest, and it's because of that that it leads to the election of 1800, because everybody was so afraid that would happen again. That's why people voted, Jefferson Burr. They voted Adams Pinckney because it was a way to avoid the same problem. But we ended up with a worse problem, which was a tie. Ladies and gentlemen, the 12th Amendment separates the presidency and the vice presidency. Starting in 1804, because that's the next election, there are now two separate jobs. Starting as of the year 1804, if you run for president, you can't become the vice president via election. If you run for vice president, you cannot be elected president. Yes, if the president dies, that's not what we're talking about. We are referring to when a person runs, they are literally two separate jobs, and you run for either this one or you run for this one. That is basically the essence of the 12th Amendment. Anyone else? Here's the item that is very small, but I will be honest, it lingers. And this is an item that could come up today if we get to the end of the year and we're talking about Barack Obama. The item is a gentleman named Adam Smith and a book called Wealth of Nations. Some of you, I don't remember, I don't know. Well, let's see. Folks, in many ways, when we bring up the Wealth of Nations and Adam Smith, what would be the item that you want to connect? Remember John Locke, what was his big thing to America? Life, liberty, and we talk about that a lot, right? I mean, in fact, a lot of the things we fight about in this country are reference to, are we being protected? Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Smith is going to develop a different economic idea. What was the old economic idea we focused on in our class? Up till now, when we talk about economics, what has been the idea? Mercantilism. Adam Smith brought up a new idea. Adam Smith argued that mercantilism was outdated. Adam Smith's idea is capitalism. And ladies and gentlemen, capitalism is an economic system that is largely based on competition. Under capitalism, it is the idea that we should allow businesses or farmers or entrepreneurs to develop, make a product, and what determines is if people buy it, it is successful. If people don't buy it, do you need to alter the product? Do you need to lower the price? That is competition. And you might as well get rid of it because you're going to see it for the rest of the year. Under Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, you see a fancy term. The guiding force behind capitalism, our economic system that we still use today, is a French phrase, a Latin phrase called laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is literally what makes our system work. And does anyone, Troy, you already said laissez-faire, what does it mean? Ladies and gentlemen, under capitalism, the entire focus of our economy is an invisible hand. The invisible hand is competition. Our society is literally driven by competition. And where does that phrase become exceedingly important? Under pure laissez-faire, competition, that means people buying, people choosing, determines to succeed or fail. Under pure capitalism, what should never, ever, ever interfere? The government. When we look at capitalism, the economy should be run by business and entrepreneurs and investors. And in fact, under pure capitalism, the only way or the only impact the government has is back to John Locke to basically protect the property. So the government should basically protect, make sure the property is enforced, and then the business makes sure that, you know, people find ways to prosper and succeed.
Okay, so the whole thing about this competition is, doesn't the government interfere if you don't pay your taxes? Like, isn't that like
All right, but that-
taxation and stuff like that?
That's a different
Taxation
issue.
is how what we're, like, for example, there's a better example you can come up with. One example that was in our unit that you will be testing on Wednesday really seems to be a conflict. Government can't help. We have a problem. Which one? Folks, the report on manufacturing is the government is constantly helping, correct? Under pure laissez-faire, and what are we going to notice in our class? Originally, the farmers, who are also a form of capitalism, are arguing it's not fair. That would be their argument, the government shouldn't help you. What happens is later in our class, as business becomes more powerful, whenever anything is against business, like, for example, taxing them more, saying that we should pay the worker more, businesses are going to yell, what word? Capitalism, laissez-faire, they're going to yell competition. What strange thing happens with businesses? If government policy helps them, like protective tariffs, the government or the businesses forget about laissez-faire. Businesses are they're driven by one thing, and that is what? Money. Normally, they want the government to not interfere because their opinion is that the government interferes, it's going to restrict them. Regulation. Later in our class, regulation is when the government wants to put rules. Businesses are always going to yell, no, no, no. Bless you. Okay? I mean, it's kind of like, if we're going to go with Griffin's question. A couple of years ago here in the state of Wisconsin, you know how there was the rules about unions. And of course, every business, no matter what kind, they were thrilled. Because if you get rid of unions, that is helping which people? But it's helping which people? Unions are supposed to help who? They help the workers. And if you have unions and workers can come together, that forces businesses to do what to workers? And the business has to share their money, right? When the government said we are going to restrict or we're going to stop protecting unions so much, businesses were thrilled, right? Today, when you see reports that some of America's wealthiest companies, like General Electric, make billions of dollars in profits and pay zero taxes, they will argue it's capitalism, right? So the problem is whenever something benefits business, I mean, it's the same as farmers. In the state of Wisconsin, the farmers generally loved Walker's Bill. Those dang lazy public workers. At the same time, farmers get subsidies. If there is a year where there's drought or famine and the crops do not produce well, farmers are guaranteed a set profit. Isn't that government assistance? Yes? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not attacking any one group. What I'm saying is people generally tend, if something benefits me, it's okay. If it helps me, that's even better. Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republican. He is the president, his vice president is Aaron Burr, and they don't like each other. We have talked a little bit about Jefferson before, so I'm not going to do that again. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing that I do want to point out, and it's going to become very important in one of the major items. In the election of 1800, one of the big things that it is or does is it is the end of the Federalist era. And if you're trying to, what? Remember, your test on Wednesday is the federalism test. This unit is the beginning of the Jeffersonian democracy. This is the first time in our history we have a change in party. When Jefferson becomes president, this is, and folks, what is the entire country afraid of? Will Jefferson destroy everything that had been done before? Every X number of years, will our country literally, change? How are we going to have a transition? Because Hamilton's views and Jefferson's views are so radically different, what will happen? And please understand, people were terrified.
So is there like actual paper money now, or no?
Certificates. So it's paper money, but the paper money really is gold or silver. So there is paper, but it's not like the old paper. The paper money now is a certificate, which means you could go to the bank and they have to give you gold or silver.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is the start of the new unit.
Absolutely. A couple of other items. Thomas Jefferson becomes president and he makes two very public promises. Number one, Thomas Jefferson promises to work with the Federalists. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is kind of like a stupid question.
Doubt it.
But, is like Thomas Jefferson like really old when he's president?
Not by today's standards. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin will live pretty long, but at the time, I'm kind of guessing. At most, he was probably in his 60s, early 60s. I think he was more like in his late 50s. Okay? So number one is Jefferson does promise to work with the Federalists, and number two, Jefferson promises that he will not tamper with Hamilton's financial programs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is the importance of this? This was designed to show that even though he was a Democratic Republican, he was not going to erase everything Washington and Adams had done. Basically what Jefferson is saying is when he begins to move forward, he was going to begin to enact new policies. He was now going to begin to look at things with his eyes. But clearly he is trying to create some comfort that he will, look at what are things that have been working and effective. And the other thing people might argue is this might be proof that Hamilton and Jefferson made a deal. Remember it at the time. Next. Here come the changes. Remember the Naval Act? Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Han, what was it for? Why did we start it? Yep.
So, we started the Navy so we could protect our trade.
From what though?
English and French.
But specifically which?
The English,
No.
French.
It was the undeclared war. So this would be much more of a specific reaction to the XYZ affair. And what you want to be aware of is we still had not completed it. We were still building boats. And just to give you an idea, the United States by 1801 was $53 million in debt again. And it was largely based on military spending. Jefferson cancels the rest of the ships. Jefferson said that honestly, what were we looking at? The United States was trying to build something like 15 warships, and Jefferson basically comes out and says, even if we build all 15, will America really be able to compete with France and England anyway? They have hundreds of ships, it's kind of a futile effort. We had, by this point, I think we had finished 7 of them. It was 7 or 8, and clearly we keep the ones that we've already built. Yes, sir.
Did they ever get out of the debt, the original one?
Hamilton had done 2 things. One, the credit rating was very high, which is kind of more of responsibility of money. Before the Naval Act, the debt had almost disappeared. Okay? One other thing you might want to put here, because it's probably a great transition, Jefferson will have, oh crud, a new treasurer. The new treasurer is a man named Albert Galatian. Wow, we can do like 3 things at once. Wow, I'm so clever. So the first thing you notice is Jefferson goes against the Washington approach. Remember how Washington tried to pick the best person, and he had Democratic, Republicans, and Federalists, and people from various states. Ladies and gentlemen, Jefferson is generally regarded as the first president who uses what is called the spoils system. The spoils system is when Jefferson surrounded himself, when Jefferson appointed people, when Jefferson picked people, they are all absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, later other presidents get attacked for this. Other presidents are going to be chastised. If you look at Jefferson's appointments, they are all Democratic Republicans. Jefferson is going to be the man who really starts the idea that the president should surround himself with people with similar ideas. So Hamilton is gone, Galatian comes in, and what is the other item that you, again, I don't care, very short. If you see a question about Albert Galatian, or if you see a question about the Treasury philosophy under Jefferson, in fact, it comes back to what was asked right here. Thomas Jefferson's goal was to balance the budget. Actually, it's more than that. It's to erase the deficit. So Thomas Jefferson was very much a believer, and that sounds very Republican, right? He was a believer in fiscal spending. He was a believer in being financially responsible. That is why he stopped the Naval Act. And under Galatian, what we're going to see is the federal government tries to be very stingy with money, generally try to shrink the government, because they believe that the government should never own money. Did everybody understand the spoils thing? Yes? Trust me, that will come back, especially under Andrew Jackson. And the main reason it comes back later is there are people who are trying to find a way to attack a president, and then people are going to argue that it wasn't democratic. The crazy thing is Jefferson, who is very popular. Jefferson is a very likable man. He was a very charismatic man. He kind of got away with it. Next. Jefferson is going to openly advocate state rights. He promises to bring back, anti-federalism. He promises to restore more authority to the states. With that one, you can put a question mark if you want to be thinking ahead. If you want to start predicting what are essay possibilities with Jefferson, the most famous question that often comes up is, when Thomas Jefferson becomes president, does he violate anti-federalism? As we begin to look through the unit, remember, this was the #1 antagonist of Hamilton, correct? When he becomes the man in charge, several of his major decisions do not seem to restrict the government. In fact, they may expand the government. In fact, some of the true anti-federalists, the big state writers, will eventually begin to criticize Jefferson. Most notable is the rich Virginian Edmund Randolph. They begin to argue that Jefferson kind of betrayed his principles. And we'll get to that as we move forward. Next, the Naturalization and Sedition Act. Remember how some of you were asking, well, how does that work? So I can't say anything bad about the president. Thomas Jefferson repeals both of those laws. So the reason today that it's not quite so hard to become an American, the reason today we can criticize the president is because Thomas Jefferson said, look, these are wrong, they're not good for America, we are not creating opportunity, and he got rid of them. With naturalization, it really shows Jefferson, because who is it that he's looking out for? Common people. He is giving immigrants a chance for the American dream. Next. Thomas Jefferson is going to become an advocate of what is called pell-mell politics. Pell-mell Mel. There are two different definitions of this. Number one is it is an open rejection of pomp and circumstance. Can someone hand, what is pomp and circumstance? Sir?
The idea of looking a certain way.
Setting an image, correct? Trim, proper, manners, etiquette. If any of you have ever read anything these Thomas Jefferson wrote all the time, there's also diaries about him. Thomas Jefferson is very laid back. He's kind of a slob. He often loved food. He would have stains and things. The other thing that you might want to know is, remember what was the agreement to get the report on public credit to pass? Capital was moved to what will today eventually become Washington, correct? For that reason, the question was, well, where do we rule the country? I mean, we don't want to be ruling the country as the building is being built, right? And of course, Thomas Jefferson offers, let's use my house. Thomas Jefferson owns a beautiful home in Virginia known as Monticello. It is beautiful. I mean, if you've been there, it is still an impressive place today. So you have to understand, Thomas Jefferson is going to largely rule the country. It's something like 80% of the time from his home. It's not that far from the Capitol. And where is kind of the pell-mell come in? He would often have visitors meet him at his house. He would often open the door himself. There wouldn't be servants. And people would point out things like he would come to the door and he wouldn't have his overcoat on. There were people who would comment. At this time in history, men would often wear 3 pairs of pants. Do you understand that? You would have a layer underneath that was kind of like your underwear. You then would have a lining because the pants were kind of a real thin, and then the outer layer is the part that would get dirty, and that would kind of help with the cleaning, and that's also how you'd make them warmer as layers you wear. Jefferson, on a regular basis, kind of like, you know how some of you like to wear sweatpants? Jefferson often felt that the outer layer, the formal layer, was not comfortable. So he would walk around with kind of the long john part, and that's very different than Mr. Washington.
So, I don't know if you ever covered it. Before that act, where was the country being ran out of Pennsylvania?
Prior, it was New York.
And did
The
we have,
original
like,
capital was New York, and then it's going to move to the Capitol and it's being built.
Did we have like a Capitol building or anything?
In New York, they probably used, and again, I'm going off my gut, it's probably just a town building, a government building that they had in New York, and they transferred it to the Capitol. So they had some sort of an office, yes.
Did they ever use Mount Vernon? Like, well, Washington?
I mean, Washington might have used it to some extent, but not like Jefferson did. I think Washington tended to want to keep his private life private, and to Jefferson, everything was kind of all together. Folks, and I want to be very clear, there's another part of pell-mell. The other part of pell-mell is the part Thomas Jefferson, like if we could bring him into our classroom, he would not tell you that pell-mell was about being laid back and casual. Thomas Jefferson would tell you that pell-mell means the government is open to the people. Thomas Jefferson, in his inauguration, Thomas Jefferson, on several speeches, basically says that he will sit down, he will talk with, he will meet with any American. He basically offers that as the President of the United States, if you have a problem, if you come to the White House, if you make an appointment, Thomas Jefferson promised he would sit down and talk to you personally. So please understand, Jefferson, pell-mell means it's a government that listens to the people. It is a government that is basically observant to what the people want. So when we talk about Jefferson, he believes that the United States needs to become more democratic. We are not ruling for the people, we are ruling with what they want. We have to listen to them. So under pell-mell, this is where you normally see the Jeffersonian and the Democrats. It is going to be kind of a democracy listening to the common people. Do they do it? Generally. Aria, small or big?
Small.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next item that we will do will be a smaller item. At this point, there's a couple of items, because you've got weird situations. When you look at dates, do you do the date that an item begins, or do you do the date that it ends? And sometimes either one can be more important. The next item will be the Barbary Pirates. This is loud, if you were too late.
Barbary?
Yeah, and folks, this is one of those where I think a lot of times people completely forget that pirates are real. And it's one of those things that I think we read them in books, you know, nowadays we see them on TV shows, and I think people completely sort of forget the fact that this was a real problem. You know, these were the bandits of the high seas. And ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Jefferson becomes president, and all of a sudden Thomas Jefferson is going to discover kind of one of those dark hidden secrets that nobody talked about. Thomas Jefferson is president, and one day, one of the secretaries comes to him and says, Mr. Jefferson, we need your signatures. You know, you're president, you're signing all the time. And all of a sudden, Thomas Jefferson noticed that one of the signatures was for like a $100,000 check. And Thomas Jefferson's like, what in the heck is this? I mean, remember, I'm Mr. Financially Responsible. And they go, oh, that's Mediterranean Sea maintenance fee. What? For the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, so it goes back to Washington. The United States had entered into agreement with it's like the Barbary Confederation, that we would pay them money, which the Barbary Confederation are, and then they would what? They would leave you alone. It was extortion. That's what, like if any of you ever seen like mafia movies, right? You pay them, and then what don't they do?
Hurt you.
They give you protection. So ladies and gentlemen, that is what had been happening. Well, Thomas Jefferson is a major advocate of honor of democracy. Would America, with our rights and freedoms, do we stand for this kind of behavior? Does this look like the proper thing to do? And ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Jefferson basically announces he will not pay. We are not going to bow down to this. The United States is going to stand up for what is right. And Thomas Jefferson says, no, no, no. And does anyone guess what immediately begins to happen? So folks, what happens is, as soon as Jefferson stops the payments, the pirates go back to what they do, correct? And as soon as, yes, sir?
Does that mean that Jefferson starts regretting repealing the Naval Act?
Let's leave that alone for a minute. I think at this point, Jefferson's about to walk himself into like a can of worms. It's one of those situations, bless you. I don't know if anybody can argue that Jefferson did the wrong thing morally, right? So here's the situation. We begin to come into a conflict. As soon as the pirates go back to doing what they do, what happens though? Bless you. See, now, here's where you guys have to be little Americans. What's going to happen?
People are life, liberty, property.
People are going to complain to the president, why don't you protect us? Why aren't you doing your job? You know, why don't you go out and kill those nasty people? Because, you know, they didn't do it under Adams and Washington. No one knew we were paying them off. And let's be honest, when you try to simply talk to pirates or even threaten them, it doesn't work too well. So ladies and gentlemen, and remember we talked about this with Queen Elizabeth. Remember when she hired sea dogs? The reason you use them is they don't have any identity. There's no responsibility. Well, Jefferson threatens and threatens, and of course it's kind of like a joke. And finally, Thomas Jefferson identifies that there are several North African countries, led by the little country of Tripoli, that appears to be where all of the nasty pirates go to fix their boats. That appears to be where the pirates go to spend their loot. And Thomas Jefferson basically begins to tell them. Remember when the King of Spain began to threaten Queen Elizabeth? Thomas Jefferson basically tells the little country of Tripoli, either you get them to stop or we will hold you responsible. Anyone want to take a wild guess what little Tripoli is going to do? The little country of Tripoli is going to be, we don't know what you're talking about, we hate those nasty, rotten pirates, and all that stuff. And the part that I think is the most interesting for most people is by the year 1801, the United States declares war on Tripoli. If any of you have ever heard the Marine fight song, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, That's the reference here. So the United States of America is going to basically march off to, we're going to use our new Navy, and we are going to try to protect the Mediterranean.
What year is this?
1801. Well, here's the problem. We begin to fight, and we will destroy dozens of their ships. They continue to harass our trade ship. In the course of the event, probably the most embarrassing moment is one of our brand new frigates actually ran aground off the coast of Africa. So it got stuck in the sand. Our greatest terror would be that the pirates would be able to take over it, because then, of course, they would have a state-of-the-art warship, so we literally had to destroy one of our own ships. In any case, if you want to summarize, the war will basically last through Thomas Jefferson. We will fight the pirates. There was really never any resolution. Thomas Jefferson will argue he fought the great fight. He basically argued that we would not back down to extortion. And finally, when you get to the year 1812, James Madison basically acknowledges that we were on the verge of the War of 1812. We were about to go to war with England. We did not want to continue to have the harassment, so starting in the year 1812, the United States basically cut a deal with the Barbary Coast, and we went back to paying a form of the fee. So ladies and gentlemen, for 12 years, now just to be fair, we do pay a reduced, a lower rate. We do kind of get we're bigger discount. And for those of you who are looking at the issue, here is the political issue. I'll take your question 1 second. When you look at the Barbary pirates, the issue is this. I've only got one pirate. The issue is this. 1, Thomas Jefferson is going to fight the good, ethical, moral fight, and it's basically a 12-year debacle. Option 2, George Washington paid the money. We basically promoted an illegal activity, but the argument of Jefferson and Adams was it was actually cheaper. If you compared the damage to our trade, if you compared the cost of sending the Navy, their argument was, as much as it wasn't good to pay these people, it was actually less burden on the United States. All right, let's go with what Quentin said. As our class goes on, and the United States begins to expand our military, specifically when the United States moves from a wooden fleet to an all-metal fleet, and the United States begins to have ships that will challenge everybody in the world, all of a sudden they don't bother us anymore. That's going to be a few years from now. For those of you who do not know, in fact, the movie's coming out this week, right? Was that Captain Phillips? Yeah. There are still, and people understand that, and today, would anybody know, where is the largest?
Somalia.
So, where is that in the world? What?
Africa.
It's on the bottom tip, though. At this time, the Mediterranean had been the problem, kind of like Tunisia, Morocco. Today, the problem is generally more the bottom, like the Cape of Good Hope. That part of Africa is very, rugged. That's the issue with Captain Phillips. His ship was actually taken. Did anyone see that story a few years ago where the idiots actually attacked a Russian ship? Yeah, because normally what the pirates do is they have a big ship and they send out these little scouting boats, and they're kind of like really souped up speedboats, so they can basically outrun everything. Apparently they went, and the stupid idiots didn't realize that the ship that they attacked was some sort of a Russian frigate. So it was a Russian warship, and yeah, the Russians weren't real kind, because normally the problem is when you capture pirates, it's international waters and you got to go through international protocol. Those pirates were never seen again. That's kind of the moral of the story, is you don't mess with the Russian Navy. So here we go. Next item, unfortunately or fortunately, is big. I don't know if we'll have time, but that's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is a big one, and remember when I talked about, is Jefferson loose or is strict? Is Jefferson going to be anti-federal, or federal. And this will be one of the items that creates a question mark. The item is Marbury versus Madison. For those of you who have not had me in class, please be aware this is going to come up a lot. As far as I'm concerned, this court case could come up on every single unit for the rest of the year, because this court case is going to be the establishment of every single other court case. Every time we bring up a court case, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, Dred Scott versus Sanford, Roe versus Wade, they are all byproducts of Marbury v. Madison. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Marbury v. Madison, and this is the problem. There's actually two very different dates. What you might want to do is there's the incident, and then there's the court case. With Marbury v. Madison, you actually should write 1803 because that is the year of the court case. The problem is, folks, and this is what you want to think about, courts do take some time. The actual incident takes place a little bit before that, and then we have to fight about it, and then it gets to court. The incident is known as the Night of the Midnight Judges, and that is in 1801. The Night of the Midnight Judges. And this is one of those items that is actually a very interesting story with sort of some anger and personal preference. Here we go. It is the year 1801. John Adams is the President of the United States. John Adams will be president until?
March.
I believe it's actually March 4th. Do I have it written down? Actually, March 3rd. On March 3rd, Thomas Jefferson will become actually, no, it should be March 4th, so this would be March 3rd. Is everybody okay with that? Because remember, the president is elected in an even year, but they don't switch, so the odd year. Folks, here's the problem. For the last several months, everybody has known Jefferson is going to become president. Okay? One of the things that was being advocated is our court system was becoming really bogged down. In order to help alleviate that, Congress passed a law that would expand the federal court system. And remember how originally we had district and then court of appeals? What we came up with is we were going to create district, circuit, court of appeals, then Supreme Court. We were adding in an entire another level of courts. Great. Here's the hint. If you create courts, you will therefore eventually need what?
Judges.
Where do judges come from? Judges are appointed, right? There's the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Congress writes the law. They pass the law. The law literally passed something like March 1st. Most people believe that Congress was creating the law and Thomas Jefferson would then have it ready for him. The problem is, the President of the United States is John Adams. John Adams is a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson is a... There's the problem. Remember what I told you before, and I think some of you kind of was one of those ones you just zipped through your head? I said that the Federalists are terrified because we're about to have a change. The Federalists are freaking out because the President is about to be a Democratic Republican, and the Congress is also about to switch. The Federalists are in absolute panic. Keep that in mind. John Adams sees sitting on his desk this brand new law. He looks at it and realizes that that law creates, it's something like 30-some new judgeships. They all had 10-year terms. Right now, the legislature is starting on in a few days. The legislature will be controlled by the Democratic Republicans. The executive will be controlled by the Democratic Republicans. What John Adams comes up with is if I fill these judgeships with Federalists, kind of like, remember how we have checks and balances? The Federalists would be able to remain control of the judicial branch. So John Adams, and this is where the controversy comes in, literally stays up all night. So literally the law comes, and he sits there filling in judgeships, he's stamping them, and literally until the last second of the clock ticks, he is filling out paperwork. That's why it gets the nickname Night of the Midnight Judges. Thomas Jefferson then becomes president. As Jefferson becomes president, he is then informed of what happens, and Jefferson, of course, is furious. And what you have to understand, folks, is Jefferson changes, and I don't know if it's true or not. Jefferson is going to argue what is wrong, what has happened, why is this unethical or immoral? Who was cheated?
Jefferson.
Nope. You can't, because if you say Jefferson, that's not how he would ever argue.
The Democratic was helping.
More so. The people have spoken. The people have objected. And what did those dirty, nasty Federalists do? They did something underhanded. So you have a problem. Did John Adams do anything illegal? No. Jefferson believes what he did was immoral and wrong. Jefferson is kind of like this man with this very strong moral virtue. The problem is, Jefferson believes that this is so wrong and unfair, it's going to screw up the government. He believes there has to be some way to fix it. The problem is the papers have been signed, they've been sealed, and then by law they have to be then taken to the Senate. And the Senate is still Federalist. So, Thomas Jefferson then makes a decision. The judgeships were literally still in the White House, signed, sealed, dated, and they were basically sent to go out in the mail. Thomas Jefferson makes the decision that those papers can be ripped apart, voided, and he could judge them. Okay? So the question is, did Thomas Jefferson, and in a minute we're going to see James Madison, and if you're trying to figure out where does James Madison, he's about to become the Secretary of State. In the technical terms, under the letter of the law, the Secretary of the State is the person who is kind of in charge of that transfer of material. So where we are at is who is the one who is wrong. We'll get to that on Monday. Please remember, if you